Flight 280 was an ordinary trip until the pilot locked himself in the cockpit, leaving passengers terrified and confused. What followed was a shocking chain of events revealing hidden dangers and a desperate fight for survival. Before we start, tell us where you're watching from and what you think triggered the pilot's sudden action. Now, get ready to uncover the truth behind this unforgettable flight. The morning sky over New York City was unusually clear for early spring, the kind of crisp blue that gave even the most anxious travelers a little comfort before takeoff. Inside JFK's Gate 47, passengers were finishing their coffee, adjusting their watches to London time, and boarding Flight 207 with the sleepy ease of seasoned flyers. It was supposed to be a routine transatlantic flight, 6 hours, smooth skies, and a soft landing by evening. Nothing about it suggested that by the end of the day, this flight would be international news. Flight attendants moved with cheerful precision, helping families settle in, checking seat belts, offering water to an elderly couple near the back. Up front in the cockpit, Captain Michael Russell, a 25-year veteran of commercial aviation, went through his final pre-flight checks. Calm, focused, and impeccably composed, he gave no sign of unease, though today wasn't just any day for him. Across from him, First Officer Melissa Hayes adjusted her headset and offered a polite smile. She'd flown with Captain Russell a few times before, always professional, always distant, and today, unusually quiet. At 8:06 a.m., Flight 207 lifted off the tarmac and climbed steadily into the open sky, bound for Heathrow. Passengers reclined, flight mode was activated, and the engines hummed their steady, reassuring rhythm. Somewhere around 45 minutes into the flight, the passengers had just begun to settle into that lull between beverage service and in-flight movies when something shifted, literally. Without warning, the aircraft jolted with a sharp, sudden tilt to the left. Not enough to scream, not yet, but enough to spill coffee, jolt hearts, and snap open eyes. In the main cabin, heads turned. Voices murmured. Some passengers looked out the windows for a clue. Inside the cockpit, Melissa looked up from her instruments, startled. "Captain, was that a system adjustment?" she asked. Russell didn't respond. He was staring straight ahead, his face unreadable. "I'll be right back," she said quickly, unfastening her harness. "Just going to use the lavatory." The cockpit door sealed, shut behind her with its usual hydraulic hiss. She was gone for less than 2 minutes. When she returned, she keyed in the re-entry code on the security pad next to the cockpit door. The green light flashed. The door didn't open. She tried again. No response. She knocked. "Captain." Silence. She knocked harder. "Captain Russell, it's Hayes. Can you open up?" Nothing. She activated the internal intercom and tried to patch in. Static answered her. A strange, sick feeling spread across her chest. Back in the cabin, the head flight attendant noticed her tense face and rushed over. Passengers, sensing something off, began watching. Melissa leaned closer to the speaker, voice firm but calm. "Captain Russell, respond. This is First Officer Hayes. Please acknowledge." The intercom buzzed softly. No voice. Then, the plane dipped slightly, barely noticeable, but Melissa felt it. The autopilot had been disengaged. Someone was flying the plane manually. Melissa turned to the head attendant. "Get everyone calm. Tell them we're dealing with a minor technical issue." "Is it?" she started to ask. "Just do it," Melissa said, forcing composure into her voice. In row 14, a businessman clutched his armrest a little tighter. In row 22, a toddler whimpered as her mother shushed her. Tension swept through the cabin like an invisible wave, thick and rising. The co-pilot backed away from the sealed cockpit door, her pulse hammering in her ears. There was no protocol for this. Pilots didn't just lock themselves inside, and they certainly didn't go silent while manually changing course. Something was very wrong. And for the 216 passengers aboard Flight 207, the sky above the Atlantic had just become the most terrifying place on Earth. Melissa Hayes stood frozen just outside the cockpit, her mind racing through every emergency procedure she'd ever been trained for. None of them, not a single manual or simulator session, had prepared her for this. a captain locking himself inside, refusing to answer calls and manually adjusting the aircraft's altitude and heading. This wasn't just a malfunction. It wasn't turbulence. This was deliberate, and it was getting worse by the second. She tried the door again, pressing her ID badge firmly against the scanner, then punching in the override code with shaking fingers. A soft beep confirmed the system had accepted the input, but the door remained locked. The reinforced barrier between her and Captain Russell was designed to withstand everything short of an explosive charge. There was no breaking it down by force. On the other side of that door was the only person in control of the aircraft, and he wasn't responding. She leaned in toward the intercom panel again. "Captain Russell, please respond. This is Hayes. If you're in distress or disoriented, I need you to speak. Just give me a yes or no. Anything. Silence." She turned to the lead flight attendant, Dana, whose usually steady hands were now gripping a clipboard like it might keep her grounded. "I need you to initiate cabin protocol. Tell the crew we may have a pilot incapacitation situation. Keep the passengers calm, but stay alert." Dana nodded quickly and disappeared down the aisle. Melissa's eyes darted to the controls near the door. She keyed in the emergency unlock code again, this time a different sequence. Still nothing. She reached for the intercom to the control tower. Static. Her jaw clenched. "Of course," she muttered. Long-distance communication systems were known to go patchy over the North Atlantic, but the timing couldn't be worse. Behind her, murmurs began to rise. Passengers were talking louder now, some pointing toward the front, others whispering with growing urgency. A young man in a denim jacket stood up and called out, "Is something wrong with the plane?" Melissa turned and raised a hand calmly. "We're experiencing a minor technical issue with the cockpit systems. Please stay seated with your seatbelts fastened. Everything is under control." The man didn't sit down. "That didn't feel like turbulence a few minutes ago. And I saw you trying to open the cockpit. You can't get in, can you?" More heads turned. The whispering grew louder. A mother cradling a baby rocked nervously in her seat. A boy of about 10 clutched his father's sleeve. The tension that had once merely floated through the cabin now thickened, pressing in from all sides. Melissa pulled Dana aside again. "Get the service card. Start offering water. Anything to distract them. I need another few minutes." Then she turned back to the intercom and tried to patch through to air traffic control once more. This time, she caught a flicker of connection, a burst of sound, a distorted voice. "Flight 207. Please respond, confirm cockpit access status." "Control, this is First Officer Hayes," she said quickly. "I cannot access the flight deck. Captain Russell is unresponsive. Door is locked. Manual override failed. He has taken manual control of the aircraft. Requesting immediate protocol guidance." The line crackled. "Say again, Flight 207. I repeat, Captain Russell has locked himself in the cockpit. I believe he's flying the plane alone, and he won't answer any hails." There was a long pause. Then a reply. "Understood. Maintain current course. We are escalating. Do not alarm the passengers. Do not attempt forced entry unless flight safety is in immediate danger." Melissa let the handset fall slightly from her ear. Too late to not alarm the passengers, she thought bitterly. Suddenly, a voice buzzed through the cabin speaker system. At first it was just static, soft and low, barely audible. Then, beneath the noise, came a sound that didn't belong, something that made the hair on the back of Melissa's neck rise. The sound of someone humming. A lullaby. Slow, gentle, haunting, and unmistakably coming from the cockpit. Passengers looked around, confused. Some faces went pale. Melissa stared at the speaker overhead, heart pounding in her throat. Captain Russell had finally made contact. But he wasn't speaking. He was singing. The cabin had gone eerily silent. Even children stopped whispering, as if some primal instinct told them that whatever was happening wasn't part of the flight plan. The lullaby continued through the speakers, soft, low, haunting. It wasn't a tune anyone could name, not quite a nursery rhyme, not quite a hymn. It was slow, almost meditative, and deeply unsettling in its serenity. Melissa stood frozen beneath the speaker, her face pale, breath shallow. She knew Captain Russell to be a man of discipline, a by-the-book type who never deviated from standard procedure. He wasn't the type to sing, let alone broadcast it to the entire cabin. Something inside her twisted. This wasn't just a malfunction. This wasn't just silence. It was deliberate. She turned to the control panel near the cockpit door, fingers moving with trained precision, and cut the audio feed from the flight deck to the cabin. The music stopped abruptly, leaving behind a chilling vacuum. But it was too late. The damage had already spread like a ripple across still water. Passengers were now fully alert. A few stood in the aisles, despite warnings to remain seated. The man in the denim jacket from before approached Melissa with wide eyes. "What's going on? Why is the pilot singing? Are we being hijacked?" Melissa lifted a hand. "Sir, please return to your seat. The situation is under review." "That's not an answer," he snapped. "You're locked out of the cockpit, aren't you? You don't even know where we're going." Before she could respond, another passenger, a woman in her 40s, gripping a rosary, called out, "Are we going to crash?" "No," Melissa said firmly, raising her voice enough to cut through the panic. "We are not in immediate danger. I am trained to handle this, and I am still in contact with air traffic control. But I need everyone to stay calm and cooperate." Dana, the lead flight attendant, stepped forward to help, guiding the man back to his seat and whispering reassurances. Melissa turned back to the intercom. "Control, this is Hayes again. Update, Captain Russell is now broadcasting over the cabin speakers. He's singing." The response came after a long pause. "Copy, Hayes. We have a crisis team standing by. Hold position. Continue monitoring all cockpit behavior. We are coordinating with military oversight in case escalation is required. Do not attempt cockpit breach unless lives are in direct danger." Melissa's jaw clenched. She didn't like how many times they kept repeating that phrase, "do not breach," as if they were already considering the worst-case scenario. She tapped the control screen and attempted to access the internal cockpit camera, praying for visual confirmation. But the screen remained black, disabled from within. In the cabin, things were escalating. Two men were arguing loudly in row 18, accusing one another of hiding something. A woman near the emergency exit was crying into her coat sleeve. The child from earlier had started to scream. Melissa grabbed the PA system mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your full attention. This is First Officer Hayes. We are experiencing a cockpit communications issue, but your safety is my top priority. I am still in control of the situation and in direct communication with ground control. Please stay in your seats. We will get through this together." The microphone clicked off. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady the pounding in her chest. Then, from behind the locked cockpit door, a new sound emerged. Not through the speakers this time, but faintly, directly through the thick metal barrier. The captain was speaking now. Not clearly, not loudly, but enough to make out one chilling phrase. "I have to make it right." Melissa pressed her ear to the door. "Captain Russell? What do you mean? Make what right?" No response. Just a faint sound of breathing, steady and deep, followed by that lullaby again. This time hummed under his breath like a man lost in memory. Melissa stepped back. Something was unraveling on the other side of that door, and they were running out of time. Melissa paced a tight circle just outside the locked cockpit, every second stretching into eternity. The words Captain Russell had whispered, "I have to make it right," played on loop in her mind. What did he mean? What did he believe needed to be made right? Her instinct screamed that this wasn't a spontaneous psychotic break. This was something deeper, something that had been festering beneath the surface. She had flown with Russell several times. He was quiet, distant, but professional, always early, always prepared. There had been rumors, whispers in the crew lounge, that he had once taken time off for personal reasons, something to do with a family tragedy, but Melissa had never pressed for details. Now, she regretted that. She pulled out her tablet and tapped into the internal crew profile system, usually reserved for emergency reference. Russell's personnel file popped up, and as she scrolled through the basic data, something caught her eye. A single incident buried deep in the notes, classified as non-disciplinary leave. No details, just a date, October 14th, 7 years ago, and a vague notation, temporary grounding. Family-related trauma. Melissa's stomach tightened. She glanced at the current date on her wristwatch. October 14th. Today. Her eyes widened. This wasn't random. Captain Russell had chosen this flight on this day for a reason. She scanned further down the file and found a second name listed under emergency contacts. Eleanor Russell, daughter, deceased. The note beside her name sent a chill down Melissa's spine. Age at time of death. 9. Cause, aviation-related accident. Date, October 14th, 7 years ago. Her breath caught. It couldn't be coincidence. Russell had lost his daughter in an aviation accident exactly 7 years ago to the day. And now, he had locked himself inside a cockpit at 36,000 feet with 212 souls on board, quietly humming lullabies through the cabin speakers. Melissa turned to Dana, who was calming a frightened couple in row 5. "I need you to stay here and keep everyone as calm as possible," she whispered. "If anyone asks, tell them we're working on a cabin pressure sensor issue." Dana nodded. "What's going on, Melissa?" "There's something you should know about the captain," she said, her voice low and strained. "His daughter died in a crash 7 years ago. On this exact date." Dana's eyes widened, and her hand flew to her mouth. "You think this is about her?" "I'm sure of it now," Melissa said. "He's not just having a breakdown. He's reliving something. This might be a grief-fueled trauma response. If I can get through to him, remind him where he is and who's on board, maybe, just maybe, I can bring him back." She turned back to the door and leaned in once more. "Captain Russell, this is First Officer Hayes. I know about Eleanor. I know what today is. But there are 212 people out here, and they all want to make it home to their families. Please talk to me." No answer. Just the hum of that lullaby again, low and distant. Suddenly, the aircraft shifted slightly. Not much, just a soft tilt, but enough to feel. A few passengers gasped, and someone screamed in the back. Melissa grabbed the intercom. "Control, we just experienced a manual adjustment. I believe the captain has disengaged autopilot. Repeat, we're no longer on course." Static crackled, then, "Hayes, confirm altitude and heading. We're tracking deviation on radar." Melissa glanced at the instruments. "Confirmed. He's veering east-southeast. I don't know why." As she stared at the changing flight path, something clicked. The destination shift. The date. The emotional trigger. She pulled out her phone and searched quickly, despite the weak in-flight signal. After several agonizing seconds, a headline from 7 years ago loaded. "Tragic crash near Halifax. 9-year-old girl among victims." Melissa whispered the name under her breath. "Halifax. He's flying us there." Her eyes filled with dread. Captain Russell wasn't hijacking the plane to escape. He was trying to return to the place where his daughter died, and he was taking all of them with him. Melissa's hands trembled as she stared at the navigation display. The line of their previous flight path had shifted, clean and steady before, now slowly bending away from their original route toward the northeast. Halifax. The realization clawed at her chest like icy fingers. This wasn't some random heading change or mechanical error. Captain Russell was taking them to the place where his daughter had died, and if he was doing this out of grief, what was waiting for them on the other end? She needed to break through to him. Fast. The intercom wouldn't work anymore. He'd disabled the cockpit channel to the flight deck. That left her with only one option. She grabbed the emergency cockpit phone embedded next to the secure keypad and punched in the override code. A faint ring echoed through the line. It was a direct channel, hardwired and analog. No cockpit lockout could fully disable it. She held her breath. Ring, ring. Finally, the line clicked and silence followed. "Captain Russell," Melissa said, voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "It's me, Melissa Hayes, your first officer." No answer. "You're flying us off course, sir." "I know why. I know today's the anniversary." Still silence, but the faint static told her he hadn't hung up. "I read about Eleanor," she continued. "I know she died in that crash. I know how much you loved her. But this isn't the way. She wouldn't want this." Static crackled faintly on the line. Then, after a long pause, a voice, fragile and strained, came through as if pulled from the depths of a haunted mind. She used to sing that song Before bed, Russell whispered. I'd hum it when she was scared. We were flying to see her grandmother. It was supposed to be routine. But the engine failed. It was so fast. Melissa closed her eyes, her heart aching. I'm sorry. I can't imagine what that pain feels like. But I need you to remember that you're not alone in the cockpit right now. You're carrying 212 souls who are counting on you. The voice came again, this time a little stronger. I wasn't flying that plane, but I should have been. I switched schedules with another pilot. He died in my place. Melissa's eyes opened slowly. That was the guilt, survivor's guilt. The what-ifs had poisoned his mind for 7 long years. Captain, that wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. But this? If you keep flying us off course, if you take us anywhere but home, then that will be your fault. You have a chance right now to stop this, to make the right choice. There was a long silence. Then, do you believe in redemption, Hayes? Melissa's voice broke slightly. Yes, I do, but not this way. Another moment passed. Then the line went dead. Melissa's heart stopped. No, 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 come on, she yelled, slamming the receiver back into its cradle. She turned to Dana, who had just returned from calming passengers. He hung up. I think I got through to him, but I'm not sure. Dana's face was pale. The passengers are panicking. They can feel something's wrong. Some guy tried to open a luggage compartment, looking for a parachute. Melissa cursed under her breath and moved toward the cockpit door. She knocked hard. Captain Russell, please open the door. Let's talk face to face. You don't have to carry this alone. For several agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then a soft mechanical click. Melissa's breath caught. The keypad flashed once. Manual override granted. The door unlocked, but didn't swing open. Melissa reached out slowly and pushed. The cockpit door creaked open just an inch, revealing only darkness beyond. Melissa stood frozen, her hand still resting on the cockpit door that now sat slightly ajar. Beyond the narrow crack, the cockpit was cloaked in shadows, the only light flickering from scattered instrument panels. The eerie silence that poured out of that space felt heavier than the air at 36,000 feet. She leaned in slightly. Captain Russell, she called, her voice steady but low. It's Melissa. I'm coming in. No response. She pushed the door open fully and stepped into the cramped flight deck. The hum of the engines was louder here, vibrating through the floor and walls. Captain Russell sat motionless in the pilot's seat, eyes fixed straight ahead, hands lightly resting on the controls. His face was expressionless, but tears had dried in streaks along his cheeks. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. It was as if he'd become a statue, locked in some inner world no one else could reach. Melissa stepped behind him slowly, carefully scanning the displays. Autopilot was still disengaged. Manual heading was set, east-northeast, confirming her earlier suspicion. They were going to Halifax. She took a deep breath and softly placed a hand on his shoulder. Captain, I'm here. You're not alone. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he whispered. She called for me in the dark. I wasn't there. Melissa crouched beside the seat, looking up into his face. You were a good father. You loved her. But that doesn't mean you get to choose how this ends. You have a crew, passengers, families waiting for them. If you want redemption, it starts with landing this plane safely. He blinked, as if surfacing from underwater. His hands trembled slightly on the yoke. I can't. I don't know how to live with it anymore. You don't have to live with it alone, Melissa replied gently. But if you do this, if you crash this plane, you'll take innocent people with you. That's not justice. That's not grief. That's destruction. He looked at her finally, eyes tired, haunted. You think I'm trying to crash? Melissa hesitated. Aren't you? Captain Russell shook his head slowly. No, I just wanted to be in the sky with her again, to feel closer. I wasn't going to crash. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. Relief washed over her like a sudden tide, but something still didn't sit right. His voice sounded sincere, but too calm, too rehearsed. She glanced back at the instruments, then at the secondary panel. Her blood ran cold. The emergency transponder code had been manually changed. It wasn't broadcasting 7,500, the code for hijacking, but something else entirely, 7,600, indicating a loss of communication. A classic decoy. Whoever had done it didn't want air traffic control to know the real emergency on board. That required knowledge. Intent. She turned to him slowly. Captain, did you change the transponder code? He looked down at his hands. I had to keep them from interfering, he said. They wouldn't understand. Melissa's stomach twisted. This wasn't just grief. This wasn't just trauma. This had been planned. And then, something else caught her eye. On the console beside the throttle was a folded photograph. She picked it up carefully. A picture of Eleanor smiling on a swing set beside a woman, Russell's wife. But scribbled across the bottom of the photo, in red ink, were the words, "They paid for the plane." They buried the truth. Melissa's breath caught. This wasn't about a random accident. This was about revenge. She looked at him in horror. Captain, what are you planning to do? Russell's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't soft. They were fire behind glass. You'll see, he said. They think it was a mechanical failure. But I know what really happened. And now they will too. Suddenly, he reached forward and pulled a lever. An alarm blared. The plane tilted violently. Melissa lunged for the controls. The cockpit shuddered violently as the nose of the plane pitched downward at an angle just sharp enough to send a sickening jolt through Melissa's stomach. The warning chimes wailed in protest, and across the control panel, flashing lights signaled every pilot's nightmare. Loss of altitude, abrupt deviation from flight path, and manual override activated. Melissa didn't think. She moved purely on instinct, driven by a pulse of adrenaline that surged like fire through her veins. Captain, stop, she shouted, grabbing the yoke and trying to level the plane. But Russell wasn't letting go. His hands gripped the control column with surprising force, his eyes wild with a mixture of grief and fury. They lied about the failure, he muttered, his voice shaking. They blamed the weather, the wind shear, the pilot. But I found the reports. I saw what they buried. Listen to me, Melissa cried, straining against him as she reached across for the autopilot re-engage switch. This isn't the way to uncover the truth. His arm flung sideways, knocking her wrist away with a startling thud. No one listened when I begged them to reopen the investigation. No one believed me. Now they'll have to. The plane's descent deepened, triggering a rapid cabin altitude warning. Oxygen masks deployed in the main cabin with a mechanical hiss. Passengers screamed in panic. Melissa could hear them over the cockpit intercom. Frantic voices, children crying, overhead bins slamming open. This wasn't just a scare anymore. This was a downward spiral into disaster. She glanced at the instrument cluster and her heart leapt. If they didn't pull up soon, they'd cross into dangerously low altitude over the Atlantic. Her voice dropped, soft and deliberate. James, she said, using his first name for the first time, her eyes meeting his. You don't want to become what took your daughter away. This is not justice. This is revenge disguised as grief. If you do this, Eleanor's memory will die with you. But if you stop, right now, she lives through you. Russell's fingers twitched. Melissa saw the flicker of doubt pass across his features like a shadow blown by wind. She pressed on. You told me you used to sing to her when she was scared. Be that father again, the one who protected her. Protect them. The moment hung in the air like the breath before impact. Then he let go. His hand slipped off the yoke, limp, defeated. Melissa seized the controls and pulled with everything she had. Her muscles screamed in protest, but the nose of the aircraft began to lift. The engines roared as the plane clawed back toward stability. Altitude indicators began to level, and the alarm silenced one by one. The cockpit fell into an exhausted quiet. Russell slumped back in his seat, covering his face with shaking hands. Melissa activated the radio and spoke into the headset. Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 280. Captain incapacitated, flight deck secure. Request immediate assistance and vector for nearest diversion. Repeat, flight deck secure. A voice crackled back instantly. Flight 280, Roger. Halifax Tower has you on radar. Emergency personnel standing by. Maintain heading 061. You're cleared to land at CYHC. Melissa nodded. Copy that. She looked over at Captain Russell, broken, silent, the the weight of years pressing down on him like gravity. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd lost everything, then let the grief rot into something dangerous. But the passengers were safe. For now. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, her knuckles still white from gripping the controls. Her heartbeat slowed, but her mind remained sharp. There was still something that didn't add up. The transponder code, the message on the photo, the scribbled claim that someone had paid to cover up the crash that killed Eleanor. This wasn't just about grief. It was about a secret that someone, somewhere, wanted buried. And now, Melissa realized she might be the only one who knew the truth hadn't died at 30,000 feet. It had just begun to surface. The wheels touched down with a screech that echoed through the cabin, followed by the heavy thud of rubber gripping tarmac. Melissa held the yoke steady as the plane sped down the runway, the fuselage trembling from the speed and recent stress. Halifax's overcast skies loomed low and gray, a soft rain beginning to streak across the windshield. Her hands remained firmly on the controls, guiding the aircraft with precise determination. Despite everything, the chaos, the near disaster, they were finally on solid ground. She activated the intercom. Her voice, though taut with fatigue, was calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We've landed safely in Halifax. Emergency personnel will be meeting us at the gate. Please remain seated until further instruction." The cabin erupted in a wave of mixed emotions: tears, applause, frantic whispers. Some passengers clasped hands, others pressed their faces against the windows, grateful simply to see the tarmac. For them, this was a miracle. For Melissa, it was only a temporary breath before the next storm. As the aircraft rolled to a stop near the emergency zone, red and white lights flashed outside. Fire trucks, ambulances, airport security vehicles, all circled like moths to flame. Melissa powered down the engines and reached across to flip the final switches. The cockpit lights dimmed. Then, she turned slowly to face Captain Russell. He sat motionless, as if every muscle in his body had gone slack. His face was pale, hollow, and he stared ahead at nothing. "They're coming," Melissa said softly. "I know," he whispered, barely audible. There was no resistance in him now, no fire left to fuel the madness that nearly brought them all down. What remained was the shell of a man who had stood too long on the edge and nearly dragged 100 souls with him. The cockpit door opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped in. Behind them, a paramedic hovered, eyes scanning for visible injury. The lead officer, tall with a clipped tone, nodded at Melissa. "We've got it from here." She gave a quiet nod and stepped aside. Captain Russell stood on unsteady feet, wrists held out without being asked. No fight, no plea, just the soft tremble of defeat. The officers gently cuffed him and led him from the cockpit, disappearing down the aisle to a stunned and silent group of passengers who had no idea how close they had come to tragedy. Melissa remained in the cockpit a moment longer, alone with the hum of residual power and the faint scent of jet fuel. She picked up the photograph still resting near the throttle, the one with Eleanor's smile and the haunting message scribbled in red. They paid for the plane. They buried the truth. She stared at it again, more carefully this time. In the bottom corner, almost smudged, was a logo she hadn't noticed before, a corporate seal half torn by a fold. It read, Ventron Aero Systems. The name tugged at a memory, something she'd read in a briefing once, about a contractor involved in jet part manufacturing, a company long rumored to cut corners to save costs. Her pulse quickened. Could this be what Russell had discovered? Was the crash that killed his daughter really an accident? Or was it covered up to protect corporate interests? She didn't have all the answers. Not yet. But now she had a name, a direction, and more importantly, she had survived. With that, Melissa finally stood up, steadied herself, and stepped out of the cockpit. The passengers looked at her as she walked down the aisle, some nodding, others mouthing silent thank yous. One woman reached out and touched her arm, eyes brimming with gratitude. Melissa offered a tired smile. Outside, the rain had grown steadier, tapping gently against the emergency ramp. But to Melissa, It sounded like applause from the sky. Not because she had saved the day, but because she had chosen to fight. Not just to land the plane, but to unearth the truth. And that fight, she knew, was far from over. The fluorescent lights of the airport terminal buzzed overhead as Melissa sat across from Detective Harris, a stern-faced man with sharp eyes that seemed to scan every detail before settling on her. The small conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper, but the gravity of the moment wiped away any distraction. Outside, the dull murmur of airport announcements carried through the glass, a reminder that life went on even after near disaster. Detective Harris slid a file across the table. Flight 280 is lucky to be alive. But the question we're all asking is, what happened up there? We know Captain Russell locked himself in the cockpit. We know the transponder was manually changed. And we know the emergency landing saved everyone. But why? What's the story behind this? Melissa glanced down at the folder, feeling the weight of responsibility. Captain Russell lost his daughter years ago in a plane crash. From what I gathered, he believed the official investigation was flawed, that some corporate interest covered up the real cause. He acted out of grief and anger. But there's more to it. I found this. She pulled out the photograph, the one with Eleanor's smile and the scrawled message. The detective's eyes narrowed. Ventron Aero Systems. We've been hearing whispers about that company for years. Faulty parts, cover-ups, bribed inspectors. Nothing concrete until now. Melissa took a breath, steadying herself. Captain Russell wanted the truth to come out, but he also endangered lives. He's in custody now, but the bigger question is, what really happened to Eleanor? And who's been protecting that secret all these years? Harris nodded slowly. We're opening a formal investigation. This plane, this flight, and the mysterious signals from the cockpit will be examined. We'll get to the bottom of it, but we need your cooperation. You were the first officer. Your testimony is vital. Melissa agreed without hesitation. Anything to help. As the meeting ended, she felt a complex mixture of relief and anxiety. The immediate crisis was over, but the battle for truth had only just begun. Outside the window, rain pelted the pavement, blurring the lights into streaks of color. Like the rain, the truth was obscured, waiting to be uncovered, drop by drop. Back in the secure investigation room, the black box, the flight data recorder, and cockpit voice recorder rested under the scrutiny of technicians and investigators. The small, rugged device was the only silent witness to the terrifying minutes before the emergency landing. For Melissa, this box held the key not just to understanding what happened on Flight 280, but possibly to exposing a long-buried conspiracy. She was invited to observe the playback, sitting alongside Detective Harris and a team of aviation experts. The room was dim, with the glow of computer monitors casting shadows on their focused faces. The air was thick with anticipation. As the playback began, the faint, static-laced sounds of the cockpit came alive. Melissa heard her own voice, firm yet calm, cutting through the chaos. "Captain, stop. This isn't the way." Then the struggle, the heavy breaths, the grunts, the desperate commands. And finally, the silence after Russell relinquished control. But it was the background chatter, the faint mechanical noises, and the coded warnings that caught their attention. The data showed unusual signals, manual overrides that didn't match standard procedures, attempts to block communication with air traffic control, and a strange pattern in the engine telemetry that suggested tampering. One of the experts, a wiry man with a meticulous eye, spoke up. "These readings don't look like pilot error or weather interference. They point to deliberate interference with the flight systems." Detective Harris nodded grimly, which aligns with Captain Russell's claims about a cover-up. But who would risk so much to sabotage a commercial flight? Melissa's mind raced. She remembered the corporate seal on the photograph, Ventron Aero Systems, and the rumors of faulty parts and bribery. Could the sabotage have come from within the very company that supplied the plane's components? Her heart pounded as she realized the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. This was no longer just a tragedy born of grief or malfunction. It was a deliberate act, and someone powerful was behind it. The playback ended. Silence fell over the room. Detective Harris broke it. "We'll need to dig deeper into Ventron Aero Systems, its contracts, and any internal whistleblowers. This black box might be the key to cracking the case wide open." Melissa knew her role was far from over. She had survived the flight, but now she had to survive the battle to reveal the truth, no matter where it led. The days following the emergency landing blurred together in a whirlwind of interviews, paperwork, and mounting tension. Melissa found herself thrust into a role she hadn't anticipated. Part witness, part investigator, part reluctant hero. The airport conference rooms became her new battlegrounds, filled with federal agents, aviation experts, and legal teams all determined to unravel the tangled web surrounding Flight 280. Detective Harris was relentless. Every morning he met with Melissa to review new leads, scrutinize documents, and dissect every detail of the flight and Captain Russell's past. The more they uncovered about Ventron Aero Systems, the more sinister the picture became. Whistleblower testimonies hinted at bribed inspectors, falsified safety reports, and a culture of silence that stretched to the highest levels of the company. One evening, as Melissa sat alone in her cramped hotel room, she scrolled through emails leaked by an anonymous source. Pages of contracts, internal memos, and ominous warnings filled her screen. There were references to critical component failures and non-disclosure agreements designed to keep troubling incidents buried. Among the documents was a series of encrypted messages between senior Ventron executives, cryptic and chilling in their implications. Her fingers trembled as she read the final message, contained the fallout. No loose ends. The plane incident must be attributed to pilot error. Russell is a liability. Melissa's blood ran cold. They hadn't just cut corners. They had engineered a lie to hide deadly negligence. Captain Russell's breakdown in the cockpit wasn't madness. It was a desperate attempt to expose the truth before it was buried forever. The weight of this revelation settled heavily on her shoulders. She realized that by speaking out, she was now a target in a much larger game. But retreat was no longer an option. For Eleanor, for the passengers, and for justice, she had to push forward. That night, she resolved to meet with the whistleblower, someone brave enough to risk everything to bring the truth to light. It was a meeting that could change everything, or end everything. The night air was heavy with moisture, a soft drizzle coating the city streets as Melissa approached the quiet cafe nestled in an unassuming corner of Halifax. She clutched the crumpled note that had led her here, the only clue to the identity of the person willing to risk everything to reveal Ventron Aero Systems' dark secrets. Her heart pounded not just from nerves, but from the weight of what this meeting could mean. For her, for the truth, for all those who had been silenced. Inside, the cafe was nearly empty, the low hum of conversation barely masking the quiet tension. Melissa's eyes scanned the room until they settled on a man sitting alone in a shadowed booth, his face obscured by the brim of a worn baseball cap. He motioned subtly, inviting her over. She slid into the seat opposite him, the tension between them palpable. "Thank you for meeting me," she whispered, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. The man nodded. "Call me James. I worked at Ventron for over a decade. I saw things that should have never happened." Melissa leaned in. "What do you know about the plane's components? About the sabotage?" James hesitated, then pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Inside were photos of damaged aircraft parts, internal memos, and even recordings of hushed conversations between executives. They cut corners on safety checks. They knowingly installed faulty wiring and engines prone to failure. When Russell's daughter died, it was because of their negligence. But instead of fixing the problem, they covered it up, bribed inspectors, silenced whistleblowers like me. Melissa's eyes widened, the pieces falling into place. And Captain Russell? He tried to expose them. James nodded grimly. Yes, but they made sure his voice was buried. That's why he acted the way he did in the cockpit. He was desperate to stop another tragedy, even if it meant risking his own life. A shiver ran down Melissa's spine. This wasn't just a story about a broken man. It was a battle against a powerful enemy willing to kill to keep their secrets. "What do you want now?" To take them down, James replied. But we need proof, and we need allies. It won't be easy. Vintron's reach is long. Melissa clenched her fists, determination hardening within her. Then we start here, together. As rain tapped steadily against the window, two strangers forged an uneasy alliance, united by loss, truth, and the hope of justice. With James's insider knowledge and Melissa's unwavering resolve, the next phase of their fight began. The quiet hotel room where Melissa had been staying transformed into a makeshift war room. Files, photos, and encrypted messages were spread across the table, illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized with meticulous care. It was a race against time, a race against an adversary who would stop at nothing to protect their deadly secrets. James revealed hidden surveillance footage from Vintron's factories, showing workers hurriedly replacing faulty parts and covering up inspections. There were financial records hinting at massive bribes paid to regulatory officials. Each new discovery painted a clearer picture of corruption so deep it threatened the very foundations of aviation safety. Melissa spent long nights contacting journalists and legal experts, cautiously sharing fragments of the story, always careful to protect their source. They knew the stakes. Leaking too soon could alert Vintron and put James in grave danger. But silence was not an option. The passengers on Flight 280 and countless others flying similar planes deserve the truth. Meanwhile, Detective Harris intensified his investigation, using official channels to subpoena documents and interview employees under protection. His team worked in tandem with Melissa and James, weaving together official data and whistleblower testimony into a compelling case. One particularly tense moment came when they intercepted a suspicious call hinting that Vintron had learned of the whistleblower's identity. The threat was clear: keep quiet or face the consequences. Despite the danger, Melissa's resolve only strengthened. She knew the path ahead would be treacherous. But justice was not for the faint-hearted. She pictured Captain Russell, locked in that cockpit, fighting his own demons. Now, it was their turn to fight. For him, for Eleanor, and for every innocent life put at risk. As evidence mounted, a sense of hope flickered. A hope that truth, no matter how deeply buried, could still be unearthed. The stakes grew higher as Melissa and James delved deeper into the heart of Vintron's deception. What had started as a quiet investigation quickly spiraled into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. One evening, after a long day of gathering evidence, Melissa returned to her hotel only to find the lock on her door slightly ajar. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside, nothing was stolen, but a clear message had been left. A single black envelope on the table, bearing no return address. Inside the envelope, a stark warning: stop digging, or you'll disappear like the rest. The words sent a chill down Melissa's spine, but also ignited a fierce determination. She wasn't just fighting for truth anymore. She was fighting for survival. She immediately called Detective Harris, who arranged for her to be placed under police protection. Armed guards discreetly watched over her, and every move she made was shadowed by vigilant eyes. Meanwhile, James went into hiding, aware that his exposure made him a prime target. The intimidation tactics escalated. Suspicious vehicles prowled near Melissa's hotel. Strange calls with heavy breathing and silence haunted her phone, and unknown figures loomed just beyond the edge of her vision. The world that had seemed so safe moments before had transformed into a threatening maze. But Melissa refused to back down. She spent sleepless nights reviewing evidence, planning next steps with Harris and James. They coordinated with trusted journalists ready to expose Vintron's corruption to the world. The truth had to break free, no matter the cost. Captain Russell's name echoed in her mind, the man who had risked everything to save lives. Now, Melissa was his voice, his shield, and she would stand firm, no matter the dangers lurking in the shadows. The day Melissa had dreaded but knew was inevitable finally arrived. After weeks of clandestine preparation, they were ready to bring Vintron's dark secrets into the harsh light of public scrutiny. A major press conference was scheduled, backed by a coalition of investigative journalists, legal experts, and whistleblowers determined to shatter the company's carefully constructed facade. Melissa stood behind the podium, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. Cameras flashed, microphones buzzed, and the room filled with an expectant hum. She took a deep breath, recalling the faces of the passengers who had trusted their lives to Flight 280, now counting on her to speak truth on their behalf. With clear, unwavering voice, Melissa recounted the events of that fateful flight, the cockpit lock-in, and the pilot's desperate actions. She revealed the layers of corruption uncovered, the faulty parts, the bribed inspectors, and the sinister attempts to cover it all up. Documents and videos were presented as undeniable proof, and James's testimony underscored the grave risks whistleblowers had faced. The room erupted in a frenzy of questions and gasps, the story resonating deeply with the public's growing distrust of corporate greed and lack of accountability. Media outlets worldwide picked up the story, igniting fierce debates and demands for justice. Ventron's stock plummeted overnight, and government agencies announced formal investigations. Pressure mounted on the company's executives, some of whom abruptly resigned or vanished from public view. Melissa felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The battle was far from over, but the truth was now unstoppable. Captain Russell's legacy was honored, not just as a troubled pilot, but as a man who had fought to save lives and expose a deadly conspiracy. As the press conference ended, Melissa caught Detective Harris's eye across the room. His nod was subtle but powerful, a silent promise that the fight for justice would continue, no matter what. Months had passed since the explosive press conference that shook the aviation world. The ripple effects of Melissa's bravery and James's testimony had forced Ventron Aerosystems into a reckoning unlike any it had ever faced. Government investigations led to multiple arrests, including some of the highest-ranking executives who had orchestrated the cover-up. Trials unfolded in packed courtrooms, revealing layers of greed and deception that had endangered countless lives. The company's name became synonymous with scandal, and regulators worldwide vowed to overhaul safety inspections and industry oversight to prevent such a tragedy from recurring. Amidst the legal battles, Melissa found herself standing at the threshold of healing. The trauma of the flight, the fear, and the danger she'd faced lingered, but the support from friends, family, and newfound allies gave her strength. She made it her mission to honor Captain Russell's sacrifice by advocating for improved pilot mental health programs and stricter aviation safety laws. Public speaking engagements and interviews became platforms to share not just the story of Flight 280, but the urgent need for systemic change. One crisp autumn afternoon, Melissa received a letter from Eleanor, Captain Russell's daughter. Her words were filled with gratitude and hope, her family's pain softened by knowing that justice was finally being served. "Thank you for giving my father a voice," Eleanor wrote. "Because of you, his courage won't be forgotten and lives will be saved." Standing by the window of her apartment, watching leaves fall like silent witnesses to time's passage, Melissa felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been harrowing and fraught with peril, but the truth had prevailed. The pilot who locked himself in the cockpit wasn't a man broken by despair. He was a hero fighting to protect innocent lives from a deadly conspiracy. Justice had been served, and healing had begun, for the passengers, for the families, and for Melissa herself. As the sun set on this chapter, a new dawn awaited, one where vigilance and courage would guard the skies, and the voices of the brave would never be silenced again. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey into the truth behind that fateful flight. This story reminds us how courage and determination can shine even in the darkest moments, and how one person's bravery can bring justice to many. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, please give it a like and share it with others who appreciate real stories of heroism and resilience. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated with more gripping stories just like this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions, so please leave a comment below. What part of the story touched you the most? What would you do if you were in Melissa's shoes? Your voice matters, and I can't wait to read what you think. Until next time, stay curious and stay courageous.